So there's a new Space Marine Dreadnought in town, it's got some big las cannons and missile launchers to take down the foes of the Emperor, and what's more, Games Workshop has been good enough to show off its shiny new datasheet. Let's take a look at the tank busting power of the Ballistus. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking a look at a brand new Dreadnought class, and it seems that Games Workshop is keen to complete their Primaris set. We've had the balanced Redemptor Dreadnought, the close combat Furioso-like machine that is the Brutalis Dreadnought, and now it looks like we're going range loadout heavy with a new Ballistus Dreadnought that's going to be coming out in this Leviathan box set. We have had a pretty solid idea that Games Workshop was going to reveal this. Ever since we saw the Space Marines vs Tyranids reveal trailer, it was clearly a brand new Space Marine Dreadnought variant. The only question was whether it was coming in the actual Leviathan box, or whether it might be held back to a later date. The war gear that this guy's armed with are the Ballistus las cannons, Ballistus missiles, and storm bolters. It is basically the Space Marine equivalent of the old boxy Dreadnought with the missile launcher and the las cannon arm. Release-wise, I'm pretty certain that this one will be initially a monopose one within the Leviathan box, and then I'd guess followed up by a multi-part plastic kit, much in the same way that in 8th edition the Redemptor Dreadnought both had an easy build and a full fat plastic kit with a few more options. I guess it's not 100% guaranteed, but I think there's at least a fairly decent likelihood that we get some sort of other interesting ranged loadout. Maybe dual autocannons will be one of the ones I'd hope for the most, I think. But I guess it could be something else interesting, maybe a different equivalent of something similar to what the Leviathan Dreadnought is armed with. Unless that does happen though, it looks like it's going to be a pretty much dedicated tank hunting beast. Games Workshop don't really say much about any different lore for it. I suppose there's not really much different other than it's a Redemptor variant with different guns. We have got a few more pictures of the Ballistus, a couple more from Warhammer community on the right over there, plus multiple people online have been posting shots of it in action at Warhammer Fest. Here it is fighting against a Screamer Killer on Games Workshop's demo games. Thank you to the person who sent me that. And the reason that we get the full rules for this thing so early is that it was one of the units that was used in Games Workshop's demo games, so they've published the datasheet. The scale, as you'd expect, does seem to look about the same as a regular Redemptor. There's a couple more pictures that you can see from Games Workshop's video here on the right, and here's the miniature that it was originally designed of. The classic boxy Dreadnought that I'm sure a whole load of 40k veterans will recognise well. As I mentioned though, we do have the datasheet for it already, so here's the one for the Ballistus Dreadnought, published by Games Workshop on Warhammer Community. We know the stats and how dangerous it is. The only annoying bit that we're missing is points cost, which means that it's going to be kind of impossible to tell how good anything in 10th edition is until they start to let us know some points. In any case, this stat line should give us a pretty decent indication as to the stats of the Redemptor Dreadnought and perhaps the Brutalis as well. I'd expect the defensive stats to be very similar indeed, so probably gives us a very solid hint as to the stats on those other Dreadnought variants. In any case, the Ballistus Dreadnought seems to retain a movement characteristic of 8, same as the Redemptor currently. It's got a leadership of 6, the same as the other Space Marine units, and counts as objective control 4 on objectives, will compete okay, and overwhelm small depleted squads of infantry. I do think it's kind of nice that you can no longer have both a Dreadnought and a single model on one objective, and somehow the single model is the thing that wins, just because reasons. For other common things, it looks like this thing explodes for D3 mortal wounds. Deadly Demise is that generic rule from the core book. The movement characteristic isn't going to degrade at all, which is kind of nice for keeping it moving quickly around the battlefield. And on the keyword section, it looks like classifying something as a walker is something that's important again. Will be interesting to see what sort of impact that makes, whether it's something from the core rules or just something that certain other abilities target. Defense-wise, the Ballistus looks at least relatively impressive, though obviously not knowing the points, we don't know how good it's going to be. It's toughness 10, so a bit more so than a Rhino, a bit less so than a Repulsor. Things like an Eradicator Melter Rifle will be wounding this on a 5+, so it should have some durability against that kind of thing. It's got 12 wounds, down from 1 from the Redemptor profile currently, and a save of 2+, which is an improvement on the current Dreadnoughts. I guess maybe the Redemptor chassis are going up from save 3+ to save 2+. It might potentially be to compensate them for losing Duty Eternal, which appears to be no longer on this datasheet. If that's a rule that's just generally gone for Dreadnoughts, it will change their character quite a bit. Things like plasma weapons are going to be a lot more effective against killing them once more. And at least against a fair few weapons in the game, despite gaining a 2+ save, it's likely a little bit less durable than it would have been if it had just kept the 3+ save and -1 damage, at least against a bunch of weapons. Finally, we've also got something interesting in the first degrading type rule that we've seen in 10th edition. This one does basically seem to be as Games Workshop had kind of advertised, when the model is 4 wounds or less, it's now -1 to hit. It looks like the debuff is now a modifier applied to the unit's attacks rather than a flat change in its ballistic skill or weapon skill, which are built into the weapon profiles now. And I guess that's nice and straightforward. It might mean that degrading vehicles might no longer stack with other sources of -1 to hit, depending on whether or not Games Workshop have kept their cap on stacking modifiers. But either way, for the most part at least, it does look like degrading is a bit less painful. I guess I would bear in mind as well that you will have the chance of taking Battle Shock once it gets to 6 wounds or fewer. Might occasionally matter if it cancels out the objective control, I suppose, or does something awkward with it falling back. For the most part though, I think if you're just sitting and shooting or stomping around shooting, it probably won't be the biggest deal as it won't impact damage output. The Ballistus does have a tiny bit of melee, which I'll just mention quickly. Some stomping armoured feet, which give you 5 attacks, hitting on 3s at strength 7. Should be enough to smush some light infantry like some Eldar or something. Not going to be a threat to anything with any serious armour though. Finally though, and perhaps the most interesting bit, is its range damage. Here we've got the Ballistus missile launcher and the Ballistus las cannons, plus the model also comes with an interesting datasheet rule called Ballistus Strike, which basically makes it better at being the units to try and take down very tough datasheets, things that have got a lot of life left as opposed to things that you're just trying to finish off. The Ballistus Strike rule means that you get to reroll hit rolls at range against units that are greater than half strength. Full rerolls to hit just baked into the miniature. A really solid damage boost this one, and it means that it's going to be kind of pushed to be a unit that tries to deal damage to the enemy's strongest units in their line, rather than to try and pick off already damaged targets. I feel like it probably is going to get this most of the time. You're more likely to be firing at a more full enemy unit compared with one that's half damaged. For the weapon profiles that you're using, you get the Ballistus missiles. These ones are 2 attacks at strength 10, AP -2 and damage D6. Basically crack missiles but with +2 strength by current 40k standards. And you can fire with a frag mode, getting 2d6 attacks at strength 5, AP 0 and damage 1. I guess at least that's a little bit of flexibility. If you are playing an army that's nothing but big hordes, the blast keyword could come in a very big way there, potentially 12 hits on huge horde units. Then the Ballistus las cannon is perhaps the scarier of the two. This one gets 2 attacks at 48-inch range, hitting on 3s at strength 12, AP 3 and damage D6 +1. Kind of interesting, it's only +1 on this one. That's not a profile that we've seen all that much. I feel like we've seen a fair few D6 +2 weapons, but +1 is a bit more rare. Still though, a fairly brutal gun. Averages out at 4.5 wounds per turn, though obviously kind of swingy depending on what you roll. It backs those up with a Twin Link Stormbolter. Just counts as basically the one profile, but re-rolling the wound roll now, as per the recent Twin Links rules. 2 shots at 24-inch range or 4 shots at 12. Just for some very rough damage output, that would average around about 7 wounds on a Space Marine Rhino. It'd be decently efficient at taking down light armour like that, as it's only toughness 9, and strength 10 goes very well into that for the missiles. Against harder targets like a repulsor though, with toughness 12, it would only be averaging 5 wounds. The missiles wounding on 5s and the las cannons on 4s really does make quite a difference. Those numbers are assuming that you do get the full rerolls to hit with that. The damage of those numbers would drop off by a quarter if you didn't have it. So anyway, certainly good fun to see full rules for a new unit in the game. Let me know your thoughts on the new Space Marine Ballistus Dreadnought down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I'm sure I'll have plenty more to talk about over the next few days. There's still a whole load more that I want to talk about from Games Workshop's preview show, including talking about some rules from demo games, which hopefully will be one of the next videos or two. Finally, if you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.